What up, heavy mommies, and welcome to another podcast. This is all happening sooner than I expected. Yeah, I don't know. I just kind of felt like doing one. So I think what I've learned is that half of my procrastination is just that if I have a deadline, then I immediately don't want to meet it, which is so stupid. It's so stupid. But I've been thinking a lot about Taoism, and I've been thinking a lot about one of the major concepts of Taoism is like to live life effortlessly, right? To kind of like go with the flow. And I'm so naturally averse to that. I'm so like, I want to control everything. I just want to have control over all the little things in the world. And of course, obviously I can't do that, right? Obviously I'm not going to have control over all this shit. Obviously, I can't control all these aspects of the randomness of life in the universe, but for some reason, I cling to this concept of control. But that being said, when I throw all that shit out the window, clearly my motivation comes back, my creativity comes back, and I'm more willing to do stuff. And maybe it's just because it's more free-flowing. I'm not like forcing myself to say like, okay, well, you have to do it at this time, and you gotta figure out whatever. I don't have to do that now. So I guess here I am releasing a podcast pretty shortly after the last one, which took me fucking forever to release. So, it's all good. That being said, there are some things that I wanted to talk about, but I don't have this super plan. So bear with me. I might ramble on some shit, but hey, that's what you listen to. You listen to this because of that, right? You listen because ideally I come up with some shit that's interesting every once in a while. I don't know. I'm coming up on almost 15,000 downloads lifetime. And although that number might not sound like a lot to some people, for me, and given the number of struggles and starts and stops and restarts that this podcast has had, I'm pretty proud of that number. I would like to get my YouTube subscribers to be a little bit more in line with that. But that being said, I'm still very happy overall. Numbers don't mean anything. Likes don't mean anything. Statistics don't mean anything. Analytics don't mean anything. That stuff's not really that important. In the scheme of things, I think for me, this whole podcast really has been a growth and exploration of me. I've really just learned a lot about myself. So if nothing else, for my own selfish gains, I've learned a lot about me. I've learned a lot about how I talk. I've learned a lot about how I communicate with people. I've learned a lot about listening more and active listening. I've learned so much about my own insecurities and my strengths, my weaknesses. I mean, this really has been an enlightening experience, and I gotta say, I really have zero regrets. And for anything that I've said on a podcast in the past that I might have changed my opinion on, I grew up. I don't know. I change opinions all the time, and as you gain more information, you should learn and change your opinions. I don't think I've ever said anything super egregious. So, I don't think I've said anything that should cancel me. I could be wrong. This could be a clip that you use to then go cancel me. Maybe. But, you know me and you know my values. At least you should by now. Obviously, I want equality for people. Obviously, I care about other human beings. That doesn't mean that I can't find some human beings' decision-making reprehensible, and that's what I like to criticize here on this podcast is, when I'm talking politics, there are certain people that just deserve to be shitted on. I don't know what it is. When you have people doing evil in the world, regardless of whether that individual themselves is evil, they're doing evil in the world. They're committing evil actions, and so those evil actions deserve to be reprimanded. But yeah, so this has been fun. For anybody who hasn't followed the gaming channel, and I know that this is maybe two different demographics, right? I talk about philosophy on this, talk about psychedelics, I talk about life things, and gaming channel is not related to that. And very specifically and very consciously, I do not talk about politics or other stuff on there. I might throw Donald Trump as an impression in some of the videos, but purely for comedic effect. I don't really want to cross those wires. If you tune into my gaming channel, you don't need to get the stuff that you get from this channel. This thing right here is its own thing. I don't really need them to cross over because the audiences don't necessarily cross over. People who might want to watch me play games are not necessarily going to be the same people who want to watch my podcast or listen to my podcast. So, but that being said, if you are interested in watching me play games, I'm still figuring it out. Right now, I have 2 Let's Plays going on. And funny enough, that has been something that I've kind of been thinking about of like, do I want to continue doing these or not? Because I like the gaming channel as a concept. And I still don't know exactly what kind of content I want to make. There's a bunch of different YouTubers that I follow that I really like their content. And there are some things that I'm like, oh, I could take a stab at like my own version of that. But, you know, fear is a big thing that has probably prevented me from trying some of the more ambitious stuff, because I also feel like I'm like, well, I've never done one of those before. I don't know where to start. But if I've learned anything about fear, that I need to go towards those things. So there's probably some things that are a little more adventurous that might take a little bit more time that I probably should do. But we all know what I said about shoulds. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to keep catching myself saying should. I still have been. In fact, I've been really mindful of that lately in the last couple of weeks. And I should myself all the time. I know I talked about this on the last podcast, but like there's so many times where I say like, oh, well, I should. Oh, well, I should. And so I'm still in the phase of like recognizing that and identifying it. And I think part of consciousness and part of raising your level of consciousness and bringing awareness and mindfulness to the present moment is going to be that you're going to catch yourself doing some shit that you were so blind to, that was just such a part of your routine that you didn't even notice that you were doing it all the time. And that's without a doubt, you know, should is something that I was very unconscious of. And it's funny that it's such a blind spot that I didn't even notice how often I did it, because I always had the logical reasoning behind should as like, well, you know, if I want to take things seriously and if I want to do these things, well, then I have to do this stuff. And so in essence, if I'm not doing these things, then I'm not going to accomplish them. So I should be doing them. And, you know, if purely based on logic, sure. I mean, I guess that's sound logic, right? If you want to take something seriously, if you want to make it your career, there is some degree of seriousness. And so all those things, like, yeah, it makes sense, which is why it was such a blind spot for me. And rational people and logical people can rationalize anything. And that is what I've totally learned about myself, is that if I'm not doing something, or if I'm not achieving something, or I'm not meeting my expectations, I can find a way to rationalize and explain why that is the case. And although on paper, my reasoning might even be true, that same reasoning is exactly why I'm not doing it. So it ends up being this weird false dichotomy thing. And I just think it's so interesting. I don't know. I find these kind of things interesting. Like, what are your blind spots? What are some things that you do not notice about yourself? And obviously, by me asking you this question, like, you shouldn't know the answer, right? It's a blind spot. And how do we identify blind spots? And this is something I don't know. I don't have the answers. But I'm genuinely curious. Like, how do we identify blind spots within ourselves and within our psyche on things that we, by the very nature of them being a blind spot, should not be able to identify? Do we need to rely on other people? Do we need to ask other people what our blind spots are? And then if we do, how often is the other person's analysis correct? How often is somebody who, you know, might say, hey, this is your blind spot, how often is it just them projecting their own blind spot, you know? Because oftentimes we project things on other people. And so today, as of the time I'm recording this, I posted a quote that I saw on Russell Brand's Instagram. And actually, let me pull it up, because I want to read it directly. Because I think I think stuff like this is like super true. I mean, I feel like it just rang really true to me. It says, when I am sharply judgmental of another person, it's because I sense or see reflected in them some aspect of myself that I don't want to acknowledge. And I think that's so true. Like, how often do we hate on some shit? Like, we're like, oh, dude, fuck that guy, or fuck this shit, or, you know, oh, that's really lame, or oh, that's cringy. How often when we do that, are we actually really criticizing ourselves indirectly? Where maybe we do those things, but we see it in someone else, and when we see it in someone else, we we're able to see it more clearly because it's not us, right? We're not identifying with it. We're not protecting the ego with it. We're not putting up the wall. How often when we are in that moment of looking at somebody else doing the exact thing that we don't like about ourselves, but aren't even aware that we do it. So you're hating on the shit. It's really about you, but you're not even aware it's about you. You might not have ever even made the conclusion that you do that. And I find that stuff so fascinating. Like, the brain has some crazy mechanisms in order to protect itself. It just builds this fucking wall, this wall of illusion that can distract us from the very thing that we probably need to bring our attention to. So I find all of those kind of psychology stuff, I find that so interesting. Like, the human mind is such a peculiar evolution of life forms and biology on this planet. The human mind is a weird enigma. It's fascinating, and it always finds a way to, I don't know, it finds a way to hide shit from ourselves, And so on some level, like, is it hiding from ourselves because we are unwilling or maybe not ready to address the thing? Or is it like just some form of protection of the ego, the identity that we create for ourselves? I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here, but I've always wondered that, because it seems to be something that, it affects me all the time, where I feel like I have blind spots and I can't see them. But I'm pretty good at looking inward. I've been doing it for a long time, and I'm pretty introspective. So there are a lot of things I am aware of, and there are a lot of things that I do have a conscious awareness of that I try to work on. But then there are so many things that still slip through the cracks. And I get it. We're human. We're not infallible. We're never going to be able to just see everything. It makes sense, right? But how come certain things, which maybe are often our largest problems, are the things that are most invisible? I don't know. I find that so interesting. Another thing that I wanted to talk about, which I haven't talked about in a little bit, is music, dude. There's been some really good music that's come out. Shout out to Big Sean, man. Big Sean's album, awesome. I really like it. He's got some bangers on it, like Wolves with Post Malone is really good. I love Guard Your Heart. That's with Anderson .Paak and Wale, and I think somebody else is on there too. Easy Mac, maybe? That song is so good. It's got such a great message. Big Sean's always been on like some spiritual shit. He's always been on that, like, he definitely has done psychedelics. He's dating Janae Aiko. Come on. He's definitely done some psychedelics with her. But I really enjoy his stuff, and I actually listened to his album on a mushroom trip, and that shit was a banger. What else? Who else dropped some projects? Oh yeah, well, so I talked about this in the gaming channel, but I didn't talk about this on the podcast. Logic dropped an album. It was his last one. Now he's beefing with Def Jam, so maybe he drops another project in order to get out of his contract. But basically Def Jam's not paying his artists. He obviously hired different people to be on his project, and they're not paying him, and that's not on him, dude. That's label money that's supposed to pay him. But Logic's album, man, dude, what a return to form, man. And I've always loved Logic. I've been a little disappointed with some of his projects, but I was not one that was like, oh, he totally fell off, or but I think he definitely let the voice inside his head control him. And from what I hear from him now, because I've watched his Twitch streams a little bit, and I've definitely seen like some clips of his Twitch streams on YouTube and stuff. He seems like in a way better place, and I think he seems like he's in a spot where he really isn't letting those things that used to get to him, and he's really found a love for himself deep within himself. And shout out to Bobby on that, man, because that's not an easy thing to do, and it's probably even harder once you reach fame, success, money. That's got to be so hard. I'd imagine your blind spot only gets bigger. But shout out to Logic. I love the project. No pressure. Super good project. Highly recommend you check it out if you haven't listened to it. Amine also dropped an album. That album is really good. I really liked Amine's album. Let me try to think of Well, this is where the phone is helpful, because I got playlists with half these songs on there. But Amine's album was good. He had like a bunch of songs that I really liked on his album. That's gonna be under my September playlist. I know it's been a minute since I've done the music stuff. I would love to review music and play it, or you guys watch my reactions to music, or me break it down. I really don't want to fight the YouTube copyright thing, because even though I don't monetize anything on this, it's like, if I'm gonna go through the whole thing and then they just block it from every country in the world, obviously that's not gonna be helpful. Let's see. Come on, buddy. Come on. This is where I probably should have just searched it, but I came this far in scrolling that I'm going to just find it now. All right. Yeah. So here we go. Yeah. Okay. Burden's a good song. Woodlawn's a good song. I like Roots. Roots is like, the metaphors in that song is good. JID fucking kills it in that song. I like Pressure in My Palms. I like Compensating. I like Riri. I love the song Easy, dude. Easy. It's so good. It's so catchy. Summer Walker, who I'm assuming is the female on the song, the vocals, does an incredible job. My Reality is a banger. I love the hook. Nas's album, dude. Nas's album is, yeah. Nas and Hit Boy, a combination that I'm not surprised I like, but didn't know that I needed. Ultra Black, so good. I liked Replace Me. I mean, I love Don Toliver and I love Big Sean, so I don't think it was Big Sean's strongest verse, but I still think it was all right. The Cure is good. 10 Points is good. All Bad with Anderson .Paak. I'm loving Anderson .Paak, dude. He's somebody who's really like come onto my radar. I mean, I've liked everything I've ever heard from him, but I haven't really delved deep into his discography, so maybe that's something that I'll do. Dude, oh yeah, Glass Animals, bro. Never heard of them. I literally never heard of them. And Joey was showing me Glass Animals. And he showed me Tangerine. I think that was the first song. And then he showed me Tokyo Drifting. Dude, Tokyo Drifted, bro. That song's a fucking banger, dude. Tokyo Drifting. I love the beat. And Denzel Curry's verse is just so good. Huge fan of that. I also really like Waterfalls Coming Out Your Mouth and Space Ghost Coast to Coast. Let's see. Brass Tracks dropped an album. Brass Tracks I've been a fan of for a little bit now. I think, probably 2018, I think, was when I first listened to them. And they're really good. I like their production. They got a song with Adi Suleiman. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I'm a big fan of him. And I like his project. His project is Memories, but it's kind of old now, but I don't think he's dropped a new project since. And then 21 Savage dropped an album, and it's all right. There's some solid tracks on there that I like. I don't want to say it's overall a great album, but I think it's solid. So let's get to October now. I carried a lot of these albums over. Yeah, I would say that those are like the main ones that stick out to me as like some of the shit that I'm listening to right now. I have a bunch of playlists on Apple Music. They're public, but I don't know how easy it is to find my thing. Like, you might need to be friends with me or have my contact number, and I'm obviously not going to give that out. So, maybe I could link some of the playlists or something in the description. I don't know. I also don't want to say that and then I don't do it, because sometimes I'm lazy with writing the descriptions of these. But yeah, we'll see. But yeah, dude, music's been awesome. Music is like one of the things that gets me through life, man. Music is also something that's really important to me on a trip. And I think I haven't fully appreciated how much music actually really does influence and dictate a trip. And there's been a lot of research on that too. There's been a lot of research on how music can deepen the experience. And there's this myth of like the Terrence McKenna Heroic Dose, 5 grams, and Silent Darkness and stuff. But the truth is that same dosage, but with some carefully curated music. You know, I'm not necessarily saying you listen to an album with a bunch of lyrics, but some sort of music to get you moving, Or even if it's like, I've really been getting into with my meditation, I've really been getting into Tibetan like singing bowls. Those are really cool. Those seem to like, I'm not a huge believer of chakras, but I fucking felt like a buzzing and different energy points in my body when I listened to the singing bowls the first time that I did it. So maybe there's some truth to chakras. At this point, I feel like my mind is so much more open to some of that shit that sounds really woo-woo. I always come from a place of like, but I want to understand the science of it, because there's got to be some science to it, right? There's got to be some measurable shit. Even if we don't have the instrument for it yet, there's got to be some measure of the energy that's flowing. So that's why I don't buy into crystals or any of that other super out there stuff. But I do believe that there's an extra layer onto reality here that, maybe we don't all fully appreciate. So I'm willing to accept that there's got to be something to it. Especially because there's so many things that I feel like ancient cultures, because they didn't get distracted with iPhones and YouTube and Reddit and Facebook and all that, that they were able to pay more attention to their bodies, and they were able to pay more attention to the environment and the planet and the plants. And I could see where with super concentrated focus, like you probably can feel some sort of extra energetic thing going on. And, there are magnetic fields that are in our bodies, and, we have iron in our blood. So there are some things where it's like, there's probably some science there. I think some people take it too far and they explain some shit that isn't really explainable, or at least is not explainable with their explanation. But I'm willing to concede that there's probably some stuff there. There's some investigation that should be had in that realm. But music really does affect a trip, and the right music hitting at the right time can really change the course of your thought process, and can change the course of the discoveries that you make within yourself. I feel like I haven't actually really talked about psychedelics in a while on this podcast, which is both a conscious decision, but then also just kind of it's not like I'm tripping all the time, so I don't always have something new to bring to the table about it. But I also didn't want to get pigeonholed in where you guys think that this podcast is only going to be talking about, as some people would call it, drugs, but as I would call it, plant medicine. But it's a cool topic, and it's an interesting topic, and I think it's a topic that is not explored enough, and definitely not explored enough from a scientific basis on the true effectiveness of it in various things. I've been really getting into learning about ancient cultures lately, and I watched some stuff about ancient Egypt, and I listened to some of those Joe Rogan podcasts where he has on Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson and stuff. And, I don't know that I fully buy into Graham Hancock's lost civilization that handed down some stuff to people. But I can buy that for sure there's some gaps in our history, and definitely could have been erased by natural disasters. And there's evidence of a massive cataclysmic event that did happen, and they've seen it in the geological stuff. I forgot what, there was some recent discovery that actually really validated at least their hypothesis of a major flood. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on there, and I do wonder what kind of wisdom came from some of these ancient psychedelic cultures, and at what point did that knowledge of that ancient psychedelic culture become taboo to the goals of those in power? Because in ancient Greece, and this was another Joe Rogan podcast that he had with Graham Hancock, funny enough, but with this other guy, Brian something. I can't remember his name. And he just wrote a book, and it's a book that I'm definitely interested in reading at this point. I'm currently reading another book, and I'll talk about that in a second. But it's all about how psychedelics were used at a lot of different cultures, including Greece, and they would put psychedelic plants in their wine. And wine is not the wine that you and I are probably most familiar with, right? It wasn't a Merlot or a Chardonnay or anything like that. It was like, they were like spiked wines essentially, and they would put different things in the wine. And there are a lot of there's a lot of evidence that certain types of psychedelic plants were actually put in these wines. And so, people would philosophize in Greece, and they would be drinking these psychedelic wines and would put them in, a psychedelic state similar to like taking some mushrooms or, being on an acid trip or something. And it would put you into that state of mind, and probably helped them really discover some interesting things. And how much of that has been lost because it's become forbidden knowledge that they didn't want to give the regular population. At the time, for sure, like, knowledge was kept tight, and a lot of people were illiterate, so a lot of people couldn't read in those times. So you gotta like always have that context in mind of like, even if people were using psychedelics, it doesn't mean that they wanted everybody to be using it, because it would have allowed people to think for themselves. And that always is, at the end of the day, I feel like that is like the ultimate reason why these things are illegal, is like they're going to allow people to think in a way that breaks cultural norms and disrupts the status quo. And when you disrupt the status quo, those who benefit from the status quo, people who are more conservative, we'll call them, who want to conserve everything as it is, they don't really want you to change things because it's going pretty good for them. And they believe, and I think this is a false belief, but they believe that if you were to change things, that means that it's going to take away from them. Now, to me, that is a scarcity mindset. That is a belief that there is not enough for everybody to go around. And so therefore, anything you take from me, or anything that you're given to somebody else, is taking from me. I think that mindset is wrong. I mean, in the world that we live in today, it simply isn't true. However, there is a belief that there's only so much to go around. And this planet obviously has more than enough resources to feed everybody. This planet has more than enough resources to house everybody, and has more than enough resources for everybody to be able to find their specialty within the world. Unfortunately, we don't allow for that to happen. The political will isn't there. And not that the political will isn't there within the people, but for sure the people in power, the political will is not there, because they're doing pretty good and they like the revolving door. Which is unfortunate, because I feel like they're holding back progress. And this is on both sides. It's on both parties, man. And I'm talking specifically in America here. But honestly, if you look globally, I mean, you'll see the same struggle. And you'll see a rise in fascism as well in a lot of these different countries, where certain leaders are getting elected because they're using these like slimy, like simple-minded, like, oh, all of your problems are that immigrant over there. Or, it's really like rudimentary thinking, kind of primitive thinking of like, oh, it must be them. I don't know. It's obviously way more complicated than that. But when you try to boil it down to one simple thing, you're always going to be wrong. And so I think that mindset has unfortunately perpetuated because we have not allowed for the other mindset to grow and blossom within our country and our culture globally. So it's frustrating when you know that if enough people could gain this perspective, and they don't need to get it through psychedelics, they could, just get it by traveling the world or, meditating or whatever. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat, for lack of a better metaphor. But like, there's a lot of different ways that you can get to that point where you understand that, and you understand that you're actually part of a larger cosmic soup, and that you are playing the game. And as Ram Dass would say it, like, you're in the dance with the other person, or the other people. We are all each other. At the end of the day, we are all each other. We're all one thing, and we are expressed in these individual bodies, right? I'm Kevin, so this, for whatever that means, I'm Kevin. But like, I'm not really as me as I think I am. I'm as much you as I am me. But because I live in this meat body, and this is my spacesuit, I view you as different than me. And these ideas are like weird. I mean, this is a weird concept to kind of grasp, but it's something that once you've experienced it, like, you understand it intuitively. You really do. And ideally, when you get to that conclusion, you get to a point where you are more empathetic and you are more forgiving of another person, because you understand that the circumstances that they are in, that you might be placed in those circumstances, you would probably make the same decisions as them. You know, we are like a sum of our genetics, our upbringing, our friends and family around us, our education, the country that we were born in, you know, the piece of land that we grew up on, even within that country. I mean, there are so many variables that change, you know, the trajectory of your life, despite the fact that genetically we are all so like 99.99% similar, or whatever it is. You know, we're all so similar, yet we all have such different expressions of that similarity. And when you really break down a human's behavior, you know, you're ultimately going to see a lot of like sameness within another person when you compare them to yourselves. Now, their expression of it might, in that sameness, end up being quite different in terms of how it ends up on the outside. But when you break down the core of the behaviors and the core of the actions, you really can kind of nail it down to like, well, at the end of the day, this is just their form of expressing a desire for self-acceptance, you know? And my version of that expression might be different than you, but it's still the same core. And if you look at something else with a human being where, you know, maybe it's a desire to fit in with society or to fit in with the tribe, that same mentality, again, can be expressed in very many different ways. And that very many different ways might look like the opposite to somebody else, right? You might look at the way that somebody else is trying to fit in, and you might be like, oh, they're not even trying to fit in. And that's where there's a disconnect, because you came up in a different perspective. You came up from a different point of view. And when you came up from that point of view, like, you can't see the way that they're expressing themselves as a means of trying to fit in, because that you just don't conceive that would be a way to fit in. You see that as maybe inherently divisive or whatever. And yet at the same time, it actually is. It's the same thing. It's the same drive that we all have within ourselves. And we all have this drive. We all have, especially that. I mean, we all have a drive to be accepted. We all want to be loved. We all want to be, you know, a part of the family. And, you know, when we were ostracized, when we were in the tribes, I mean, that literally might have meant certain death for you. So there's a lot of genetic programming that actually really forces us kind of into these various expressions of acceptance, or, you know, attempting to fit in. So all of these things are, you know, they're inherently human, and we are all inherently the same thing. But it's hard to see that sometimes. And it's hard to empathize with that sometimes. Some people make it really fucking hard, dude. You know, like, I have a hard time empathizing with Donald Trump. I do. I got a hard time I can understand that from a certain standpoint, all Donald Trump wants is to be loved. If you really break it down, he really just wants to be loved, right? He's all about, like, he's always doing things that they seem divisive to you and I, and they are, but they're really coming from the same core drive. Like, I think he does ultimately want to be loved. Now, he's also an insane narcissist and probably has some, you know, quote unquote disorder. But really, when you get to the root of it, like, it is an inherently human thing, even if some of the shit he does is just horribly evil, right? So not to overly humanize Donald Trump, because he really is doing a lot of harm for the world right now. And I think, you know, we really just need to get him to be no longer relevant in anybody's life. But at the end of the day, he is a human being, and he is trying to accept himself. He just does it in a really dumb way, because he's not really conscious. Like, that dude's not conscious at all, bro. That guy might as well be unconscious. Like, I don't think he actually understands anything about himself. And it becomes really clear. I feel like when you learn and you know, maybe I'm talking out of turn here, but I feel like when you learn about yourself and like you really understand certain things about you, when you see somebody else who really just doesn't have it figured out, one, you should be empathetic to them, right? You should understand because you came from a place of that at one point before you gained your awareness. But then two, you know, you can just see it. Like, it's so obvious when somebody's like not being themselves and you always are. Like, it's almost painful sometimes to be around those people. Like, it's such a weird energy because you're like, okay, bro, but you're like fronting right now. Can you just be real for a minute? And they can't. And it's not that they can't ever, but they can't in that state of mind. They can't in that moment because they are not aware of themselves, as well as not present. And something that I've definitely struggled with, and I talked about this on the last podcast, was like I struggle with presence because of technology. Like, I'm in my phone too much. I'm on my computers too much. I'm on the iPad too much. I'm on all these devices, you know, and I can rationalize to myself that, well, I use these devices for creating things, and it's also my way of communicating with people. But in the end of the day, all of those things are things that are pulling me out of the present. They're pulling me out of the moment and truly appreciating where I'm at, right? Feeling the wind on my skin, or, you know, feeling, or in this case right now here in Chicago, seeing the fall colors start to emerge and the leaves falling from the trees. You know, it's very easy to not look at that. You could just look at your phone. You could just have your headphones in. You know, you don't have to listen to the natural sounds of the birds chirping for as long as they stay here. Or like cars driving by or whatever. You know, it's very easy now with our technology to distract ourselves from the present moment, to avoid the problems that we might have within ourselves, because why would you ever need to deal with it when you can just escape? So the second you start feeling bad, you can go to Netflix. Or the second you start feeling bad, you can go to YouTube. Or you can go play video games. Or, you know, whatever the thing is. And there are some things that are healthier than others in terms of that form of escapism. You know, I think creative expression is a more healthy version of that. But at the end of the day, it's you not being capable of sitting with yourself and really kind of figuring out, well, you know, what am I doing? You know, what am I doing right now? Am I present? Am I in the moment now? Am I here? And I think right now it's too easy to not be here. And in fact, it's hard to be here now. Be here now, Ram Dass. But it's getting harder and harder to be here now. And it's getting easier and easier to distract yourself and to avoid it and to not pay attention to the inner voice that isn't coming from here, but coming from here. And for those who are listening, I pointed to my head and then my heart. You know, I think the mind, what I've learned for sure, and Big Sean's dad said it right on Dark Sky Paradise, is the mind is a fucking trickster, man. But your heart will never lie to you. And it's true. It's true. Your heart really will never lie to you. And when you're really listening, and I mean truly deep listening, and this is something that is something that Alan Watts makes a distinction of, is like listening versus talking to yourself in your head. They're two different things. You know, because when you really are listening to yourself, the right questions come up. And sometimes answers come up, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's just the right questions. And you know it, you feel it. But when you're thinking it, it's a distraction. In fact, it's an illusion, and oftentimes it's wrong. So learning to find the inner voice that speaks from the heart rather than speaks from the brain, that's a hard thing to do, man. That's not an easy thing to do. That takes literal discipline and practice. I'm still not that good at it, you know? I'm aware of its existence, but that doesn't mean that I'm always doing it. So I think for me, learning to listen to the heart more and learning to speak from the heart more, as I am right now, you know, this is something that is only allowed because I'm letting it happen. I'm letting myself be in the moment of this podcast. If I overthought this podcast before I did it, dude, I didn't plan anything. I literally didn't even plan what I was going to talk about. But like all of that comes from me now, I think, being just more accepting and more willing to be present. And I think just regaining my awareness of my lack of presence has made a big difference. And have I solved all my problems? Of course not. Have I fixed everything in the world? No. You know, but I got lost and I've found my way back to my trail. that I'm paving on my own way anyway. So this trail is not one that's been walked before. And it's important for us to walk our own path. And it's fine if you want to start on somebody else's path for a little bit, and maybe that gives you a sense of clarity, and maybe it gives you your bearings. But at some point, you need to go off the beaten path, and you need to create your own. And in the process of creating your own, if you're present, you will know where you are at all times. You will always know where you are at when you are here, when you are present. And we only ever have the present moment. And I think sometimes it's really easy for us, especially here in America, as our forward-thinking society, and always thinking, what's the next thing that we're going to do? We're Mr. Productivity, Mrs. Productivity. And it's really easy to go from thing to thing to thing without ever really stopping to think of why, or what am I doing, or how am I doing it? How am I doing right now? Am I on the right path? Am I doing the right things? You know, how often do you ask those questions of yourself? The answer is probably not as often as you should. And I say should in quotes because there isn't anything that you should or shouldn't do. But when you listen to your heart, you'll know what you are supposed to do without it being should. I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of a weird thing because on one hand, if you're overly thinking about whether you should or shouldn't do something, then you're already maybe a little more misguided. It's just like a feeling. It really isn't a thinking thing. It's a feeling thing. Like you can feel when you're doing something and it's good for you. You know when it's good for you. But if you are going through life and you're just kind of unconsciously doing shit, one thing to the next, and you're not really thinking about it, you might not even notice that it doesn't even feel good anymore. You might not even notice that you're like, damn, like this hasn't felt good in like 6 months. And I think for me, like I had that realization, and that's probably why I took such a long break from the podcast, because I saw that, like, I knew initially when I was working on this, like I knew that the podcast felt good, but at a certain point it stopped feeling good, and I didn't know why. And I wasn't fully aware of it not feeling good either, because I always associated the good feelings of, me having the conversations with people and stuff. Like I always enjoyed that part. So that was never a thing that I really questioned, because I kind of knew that I like to get these ideas out. I like to speak them into existence. I like to put them out onto the internet and get feedback. Not that I get a lot of feedback, but I like to at least put it out there, and ideally at some point people will give me more feedback. And at a certain point I realized that I'm like, wait, this doesn't really feel good. Like I feel kind of stressed, and I'm kind of frustrated, and I'm kind of not happy. And I couldn't figure it out. And obviously COVID-19, I think, just made me like take a moment to stop and like really think about it. But And maybe a lot of people have had that too, where they've like COVID-19 has kind of like woken them up, right? You could no longer go outside and go to the bars and distract yourself by drinking, so you couldn't bury those feelings anymore. And so unfortunately, the diseases of despair have only gone up now, because it's only further awakened people to their own misery. And it doesn't have to be that way. But if you've been unconsciously going through life and you're not really thinking about the things that you're doing, well, then you very well could be in misery, and you've been hiding it and masking it the whole time through drugs, alcohol, hanging out with friends, whatever the thing is, at work, whatever. Like everybody has a different way of masking their pain. And some, again, are more healthy than others. And so like when you really think about it on like a macro level of like, well, how am I really doing? Like, am I enjoying life? Am I spending time the way that I should? See, I'm fucking still doing it, man. I'm still learning. But like, in that sense of should, meaning truest to my true self, whatever that means to you, and you guys can all internalize what that means. But like that, I guess that's what I mean by should in that sentence, is not that, oh, I should be doing this or I should be doing that. But like when you feel good at the core and you're feeding your soul, what are the things that you do? And that's really the question you just have to ask. There's no should or shouldn't. It's just, what feeds my soul? What makes me feel good? Not on a purely like pleasure-seeking basis, like hedonistic lifestyle. Not that. but on a feel good, like my soul feels full. Like I'm fulfilled when I do these things, or I'm fulfilled when I'm with these people. And I think it's just important to ask those questions. You're not even going to know the answer when you ask the question. But the more that you ask the question and the more that you allow the answers to come naturally to you, the more clear and the more clarity you gain. So I think for me, I'm just at that point right now where I think I'm gaining a lot of clarity on like, well, what really feeds my soul? Well, one of them is doing the podcast, but it's not doing it like a job, and it's not doing it on a specific schedule. It's doing it on an inspiration basis. It's doing it when I feel like doing it. So today was a day that, like, again, I didn't have a plan for this podcast, but I knew I wanted to have one because I figured there was some interesting things that I could get off my chest. And hopefully this stuff is helpful to you or is interesting or at least makes you think about it. That's really all I'm trying to do here, man. Like, don't listen to me. You don't have to, like, take my word as gospel. I don't fucking know shit, man. I'm just on my own journey and I'm learning things and I want to share with you the things that I learned about myself. But that doesn't mean that it applies to you. That doesn't mean that I have all the answers or anything like that. I don't have any answers. Dude, sometimes I don't even have answers for things that I feel like I should have the answers to. So I think it's just important to, like, talk about these things out loud, to hear yourself say them. And, sometimes the things will be dope and will be wise. Sometimes the things you'll say, you'll be like, man, why did I even entertain that thought? Because when you're mindless and you're not mindful, your thoughts carry equal weight in your brain when they shouldn't. Some thoughts are coming from the heart. And that might be contradictory, but meaning, like, there are some things that the thought, or at least the energy behind the thought, is actually coming from here. And it's verbalized through the brain, but or on some level communicated to you through the brain. But the energy and the source of it is actually coming from the heart. And I think, like, when something is coming from the mind, it could be, that little nagging voice in your head. It could be, usually your negative voices, by the way, are like people in your life that like criticize you or, something that made you feel a certain way. That's usually the voices we associate. And if you've ever paid attention to the voice when it's being negative to you, like, listen and try to see if you can identify who it is. And so it'll actually it'll take away the power of the voice itself, because you're now no longer focusing on the content, but you're focusing on the source in which it came from. And when you find the source of where that negative voice is coming from, you realize that it more often than not comes from maybe a sense, like some sort of childhood trauma or some previous thing that happened in your life that maybe allowed you to think that thought in some way. So I implore you all, listeners, to think about these things and let them go. Like, truly let them go. So think the questions, right? Don't think about answers. Just think about the questions and let them go. And then whatever answers arise from that, whether it feels right or not, that's what you need to pay attention to. And pay attention to the source. Identify the source. Identify the voice. And make a mental note of whether it is positive or negative. Don't judge it. Just make a note. Is this coming from a place of positivity? Is this coming from a place of negativity? And when it's coming from a place of positivity, identify that as well. Don't attach yourself to the positivity because it feels good. Identify where's that positivity coming from. Because when you identify the source of the positivity, it makes it easier to pull more things from that source. And if you identify the source of negativity, it makes it easier to let that negativity pass when it arises, right? We can choose to empower the thoughts by giving them energy, by giving them attention. When we give thoughts attention, we are giving them life. An idea or a thought has the ability to be born and created into this world, literally physically manifested into this world, right? You can have an idea, and that idea you can make a real thing. Maybe that idea is a product. Well, you can make that product real by giving it energy, attention, and then manifesting it in the physical world through, whatever actions you need to take to then make that real. And so it is a thing where you can manifest these things through intention, but it also takes action, and it also takes a discerning intuition, which can only be cultivated not from the mind, which is counterintuitive, but not from the mind, but from the heart. So yeah. So this is an unexpected podcast. I did not know I was going to record this, but yeah. So shout out Heavy Mommies. I love you all. Definitely like, subscribe. All my links are in all the descriptions. So if you want to check out my gaming channel, I got all the links for that. I got all the links for the YouTube channel here as well. And then, yeah, just check me out. Give me a follow on Instagram or Twitter. Instagram is probably my most active platform. You can also find me on Facebook. I'm a little less active on that. I think Facebook's evil. But then again, Facebook owns Instagram. So, they're all evil. I don't know. Social media is probably all bad for us, and it's probably cancer. But that being said, in order to spread some of this information, I kind of have to use the platform, right? So thank you again for listening. I appreciate you all. Peace out, Heavy Mommies.